Greetings everyone, and welcome to the AI World Summit 2020, organized by MyFinB Group. Today, we have a special guest. As part of a Fireside chat series, he is none other than Bhalekar, Vice President and Junior Partner at McKinsey & Company. Prior to joining McKinsey, Mr. Bhalekar was part of Accenture Mobility's global leadership team where he led the Industry 4.0 practice for the region. Based in Singapore, he is focused on digital transformations powered by the Internet of Things, I.O.T. in Asia. Mr. Bhalekar has 18 years of experience in different parts of the digital ecosystem including startups, OEMs, standards bodies, mobile operators, and mobile OS developers in North America, Europe and Asia. Hosted by MyFinB CEO, Adjunct Professor M. Nazri, Bhalekar will be touching on the topic of the future of industries, maximizing I and AI adoption. Now, I leave the digital stage to the host to take over. Over to you, Adjunct Professor Nazri.
Hi, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. Welcoming the audience who just joined in to this particular track called The Future of Industries. I'm so honored and privileged to have Ani with us. Basically, Ani comes from one of the top consulting firms in the world. They produce the best brains, one of the best brains in at least AI research, AI advisory, and he's currently based in the McKinsey Singapore office. He's a VP for Internet of Things, as I mentioned, as was mentioned earlier, serving clients across sectors on smart cities, connected transport, Industry 4.0, analytics, mobile and digital technologies. These are all the IR 4.0 language, yeah, Ani? So we hope that you'll be able to humanize some of these terms and humanize some of these technologies and see how this can be applied across industries and what would be the sexy things to look at, what would be the risky things to look at, amongst others. So we have quite a list of questions for you in the next 45 minutes or so. And we are very, very privileged to hear what you have to say about some of these things. But before that, let's start with something very personal, very casual with you, Ani, for purpose of the audience. In your line of work, being in one of the top consulting firms in the world and being a forefront of AI research advisory, amongst others, what does AI really mean to you personally, right? And in your line of work, how does this relate to the kind of outcome that you deliver to your clients and the kind of outcome that gives to yourself? Like what sort of reaction or feeling or resonance that sits in you when it comes to AI? Over to you, Ani.
Sure. Hey, thanks, Nazri. Very excited to be here. Hello, everyone. Now, obviously, Nazri has given me a very glowing introduction, so thank you for those words. I do have to add that before I was a consultant, I have been a product CEO for most of my career. So artificial intelligence has always been extremely important for us, even before it was actually called AI. For example, I was part of the core team that designed and developed Android. Now, this was 12, 13 years back. And at that time, we aspired to make the best browsing phone in the world, right? Without knowing that AI was going to be a big part of it, right? And there was no term called AI. We just wanted to use the smartest technologies out there to build this product. And throughout my career, I've always been involved with startups, right? Which have been focused on IoT, like you said, Nazri, and AI as well, in different roles, right? As a mentor, as a founder, as an investor, an advisor. So personally, it is extremely exciting to me to be involved in AI because the way I view it is that this is an opportunity for my team and I to actively influence the future of the planet and at scale, right? So what better opportunity at a lasting legacy can one ask for, right? So this is actually why I'm personally excited about AI. Now, professionally, obviously, it's extremely exciting, right? Since almost everything that we do today that is touched upon by technology in one way or another will most certainly be deeply impacted by AI going forward. AI is poised to unleash the next wave of digital disruption, and companies should prepare for it now. We're already seeing real life benefits for a few early adopting firms, which makes it even more urgent than ever for others to accelerate their digital transformations. And we've been introduced to new AI applications that span virtually every major industry, right? All the way from manufacturing to heavy industrials to the public sector. With better algorithms, increased stores of data, reduction in error rates of computing calculations, hardware performance that has improved dramatically, we are now getting machines, both physical and virtual, to process this unprecedented amount of data. And that's actually been a major driver of both my professional and my personal excitement.
And when you talk about AI for purpose of the audience, right, there are so many definitions, there's so many interpretations, there's so many perceptions about what AI is and what AI is not. So before we get to the applications of AI across industries, as your as you are subject matter expert in that, but let's not lose the crowd, yeah. So maybe if you could give us a quick, snapshot or overview of what is AI and what is not, that'd be great.
Right. So I'll give you an example that completely steers clear of the buzzwords, right? The best way of thinking about AI is to think about our personal relationship and evolution with data. So let's take an example, right? 25 years back, most of my personal data was paper-based. So if I wanted to look for a picture of me sitting on a beach, I would have to go through several physical picture albums, right, to find that picture that I'm looking for. About 15 years back, right, storage had become mainly electronic, but still manually indexed, meaning that when I was looking for that picture of me on a beach, I could log into my computer, I could go into the folder that was marked, say, Hawaii vacation, I could pull it up. And over the last 5 years, we have come to a point where this indexing is automatic. What that means is I simply dump all of my structured and unstructured data, meaning all of my pictures, videos, documents, Excel spreadsheets, emails, all in one place, say Google Drive. And I simply type beach for my beach pictures, right? Not only for Hawaii, but also from other locations to show up. So this is the magic of AI for managing data, indexing data, and making me more productive in looking up what I'm looking up.
And just on that, what is the difference between intelligent automation and artificial intelligence? I mean, on one hand, you talk about automating certain manual processes. On the other hand, it involves more cognitive thinking and decision-making process. Again, for purpose of the audience, they're very keen to hear your thoughts, how you would differentiate between automating and cognitive computing or decisioning.
Correct. So automation is not new, right? But what recent technological progress has done is we're pushing the frontier of what machines can actually do. And society actually, if you think about it at a broader level, needs these improvements, right? To provide value for businesses, to contribute towards economic growth, and to make once unimaginable progress on some of our most difficult problems, right? Both industrial as well as societal. So the biggest difference really is the capability in general of what machines are capable of doing today, much beyond automation, as opposed to a few years back, right? And the reason machines are capable of doing this today is exactly those that I mentioned before, which is hardware is getting a lot more inexpensive and powerful. Connectivity is getting very also inexpensive and accurate. We are starting to see an evolution in terms of cloud computing, but also at the edge of where these decisions need to be created and insights need to be generated. So a combination of these 2 or 3 technology trends is getting machines to do cognitive work as opposed to pure and simple automation. And that is really the differentiator.
Thank you for that. Now, still on technologies, before we drill down further into pain points, case studies, and use cases, right? I have a slide here to show you and to show the audience the technology frontier, right? This is actually done by Forrester Research. And you can see horizontally, it's the horizon, the time horizon of how the period of disruption is going to continue or persist, right? And vertically talks about the types of advantage, competitive, industry, game-changing, and changing the world kind of thing. Now, of course, McKinsey produced many of this, and which I read, in a disciplined manner. But for this, do you foresee that there's going to be changes in terms of the ranking, in terms of the impact, in terms of things that they may have missed out, things that have changed due to COVID, that change the shape and complexion of the priority of technologies out there? So by answering this and giving your insights, we can then try to zero in on how some of these can be explained further into the industry use cases and the case studies that you're going to share with us, hopefully. Right?
Absolutely.
So, where do you, first of all, do you agree that this is going to be the same spectrum of technologies that's going to be prioritized in this way in the next 3 to 5 years? Number one, right? Number two is, if so, if not, there'll be some variation of sort. Why do you think that's the case? And where does AI stand in all of this? Right? Over to you,
Yep.
Anil.
Yeah. So there's two answers to your question, Nazri. The first is that there are 5 broad categories, right, of technologies that I just spoke about that contribute towards all of the paradigms that you see on the page that you mentioned, right? It's a combination of hardware, connectivity, storage, compute, and a couple of other things. But the important part to remember and to recognize is that technology for technology's sake is not really disruptive. What typically happens is people think that AI or IoT or any other suite of technologies is going to solve their problems. And the truth couldn't be further away from that, right? It really comes down to what are the insights that you're seeking as a business? What are the actions that you're trying to enable as, for example, a smart city? What are the key KPIs that you're trying to solve for as an individual even, right? So the combination of these KPIs, these actions, these insights is really what will be driving technology going forward. I think across that entire spectrum of technologies that you showed, one of the things that bubbles up now more than ever before is the ability for us to no longer be limited by technology. We are empowered by technology enough to be limited only by our imagination. So what I work with, right, and what I encourage my clients to think about is to divorce yourself from technology and really think about the human problem that you're trying to solve for, or the corporate problem that you're trying to solve for, or the public sector problem that you're trying to solve for. And then look at technology with that lens in terms of whether there is a fit here or it's just the shiny new toy that people want to play with. And that is really what's going to happen going forward. And we're starting to see signs of that already. But I expect that in your chart, maybe next year this time, we'll start to see a more end problem-centric curve that then brings together not only new technologies, but technologies that have been around for decades. The Internet of Things is a fantastic example where people talk about IoT like it's a new thing. IoT has been around for better part of 30 years. It used to be called machine to machine. Before that, it was called embedded systems. So the reason it's at a nexus point right now, a tipping point, if you will, is because these devices are getting smaller, more accurate, bandwidth's getting more inexpensive. But you're for the first time able to use a suite of these technologies, both new and old, to solve specific business outcomes. And that's actually what's going to change.
Let's excellent answer. I could not agree with you more. Let's hold the industry aspect constant first. And I agree with you on the basis that the education sector has a lot to play as a result. You know, the graduating students who's entering the workforce, who's studying computing science, who's studying computer science and data analytics, big data, whatnot. So their current emphasis right now is more on the technical programming and coding, and it's really opposite of what you said. They're learning the hardcore technical aspects of it, and they feel that if they lose it, they will not be part of it. So yet, on the same time, you're saying that in the next few years, the design thinking approach, you know, the problem solving mindset needs to be more prominent than ever. How do you reconcile with what universities are teaching right now versus what the industries need, you know, more than ever?
Right. So there's two answers to that again. You're asking really good questions, by the way. So let's think about what AI actually does to human beings, right? If you think about the design centric approach, right? Service design approach. AI is about augmenting human abilities, right? And that's the right word, augmentation of human abilities, and in certain areas, even enhancement of human abilities. Once we understand this is what AI brings to the table, we generally start to see openness, right, across academia and industry. So AI and automation in general brings benefits that will need technology and design to come together to realize fully, right? Otherwise, a lot of these benefits are going to be only theoretical and on paper. I'll give you an example. So partial automation will become more prevalent as machines complement human labor. For example, AI algorithms that can read diagnostic scans with a high level of accuracy will help doctors diagnose patient cases and hence identify suitable treatment. In other fields, jobs with repetitive tasks, right, could shift towards a model of managing and troubleshooting automated systems. For example, at Amazon, and this is what we are seeing in today's world, employees who previously lifted and stacked objects in warehouses are becoming robot operators. They are now monitoring the automated arms and resolving issues such as interruption in the flow of objects. So as intelligent machines and software are integrated more and more into the workspace, workflows, the design of workflows and workspaces will have to continue to evolve to enable humans and machines to work together. One example that I love, right, is something that we as individuals see frequently in grocery stores at self-checkout machines. As more and more of these self-checkout machines are introduced, cashiers are now becoming checkout assistant helpers, right, who are basically answering questions or troubleshooting these machines. So design thinking is absolutely key to enabling deeper and sustained impact of AI going forward. And we're actually starting to see not only industry drive towards this direction, but we're actually starting to see academia as well, right? Once we frame the AI question as one that's around augmentation, not replacement, then we're starting to see a lot more openness. In fact, a lot of hardcore technical universities are starting to introduce more design centric classes. In fact, we have an example of a university here in Singapore that brings together the best of breed in terms of design as well as in terms of technology. And we're starting to see examples of these percolate throughout the planet. So very soon we'll be at a point where service design and technologies like AI and IoT are not really segregated but work together.
Fantastic. Now, you mentioned about augmenting intelligence, right? Augmenting the natural intelligence with, you know, system intelligence. What are the kind of barriers or how to say, resistance that people have whenever, you know, their brains or their thought processes or their human decision is taken away from them in partial or in whole? Based on your experience dealing with large corporations, institutions, government agencies, do you see this happening where despite their masters, right, their employers, the top management pursuing the digital transformation, yet there could be some resistance towards accepting it? And again, the second part to it then would be what type of resistance or what causes that resistance to take place? Is it more of economic Is it more of a change, attitudinal kind of thing, or is it more in terms of the in terms of the competency issue, right? So so it's a two-tiered question. Hope you can bear with me as we have that little time with you, and we hope that you can give us a brief answer, or at least a very integrated answer to that.
Indeed, indeed. So let's talk about the issues, right? There are change management issues, which are attitudinal, like you talked about. There are capability issues, which focus on competency, for example. There are economic issues, which are about cost to benefit. Now, I work very closely with the McKinsey Global Institute, and our survey findings through the McKinsey Global Institute, which is the largest private think tank on the planet, we find that a minority of companies actually recognize a lot of these AI issues. And even fewer of these are working to reduce the risks. Cybersecurity, for example, remains the only risk that a majority of respondents say that their organizations are considering relevant. And we are starting to see companies that are starting to manage the risks related to AI explainability. Now, this is a key issue. High performers with AI remain more likely than others to recognize and mitigate the question of AI explainability. Specifically, right, we've seen that respondents in our survey at high performers are more than 2.5 times likely than others to say that their organizations are managing equity and fairness, which are risks such as unwanted bias, for example, in AI-driven decisions. A lack of AI model explainability, right? I mean, it's very easy to say that this is AI and hence it's complex, but it's extremely important to explain what the model does and how it works. And a lack thereof presents a risk in literally every industry. In some areas, I'll give you a couple of examples. Healthcare, the stakes are particularly high, right? When AI could be presenting a recommendation for patient care. Another example is in the financial services industry. Regulators may need to know why a specific organization that's using AI is making particular lending decisions, right? For example. But the explainability of AI, on the other hand, can also present another risk, which is a lack of AI adoption, right? Because we don't understand it and because we don't understand how it works, there is a potential of wasted investment and the risk of falling behind the competition. Let me give you a specific example that McKinsey worked on, right? We were speaking with the head of transformation at a global manufacturer. And he noted that without an explainable model, adoption by frontline workers was nearly impossible because the workers who were on the front lines needed to be able to trust the AI's judgment, not only for the sake of being more efficient, but for their own physical safety. So for example, when an AI tool recommends to a operator that this is how you want to run a potentially dangerous heavy equipment, right, in a certain way, that operator needs to feel confident that the reasoning behind this decision is sound and safe. So what the manufacturer did, the employer, is that they used the simplest and the most transparent models to explain this to their frontline employees. And that's gone a long way, right, in making workers confident and excited to use AI and AI-centric applications. It's improved their operations. It's contributed towards a 15% uplift in earnings. And all of this done through the simplicity of explainability of AI. So long story short, that's one of the key issues.
And here you talk about trust, and you talk about AI solving the pain points of managing data, deriving insights, and making decisions out of them. And then in between, there'll be trust issue before workers or users of it can actually use it. There was a comment made by one of the panelists in the earlier tracks that looks at data as a form of trust. And yet, when data is trusted, the source of it, the analysis of it is trusted, right? There could be the politics of it, whereby when you look at the reports, right, look at the findings, the insights, you disagree with that because it may politically cost you. You disagree with that because it may affect your appointment of sorts, right? There'll be a moral hazard or agency cost associated to it. Now, I don't want to get into a long debate about trust per se, but in your line of work, Ani, how does McKinsey, how do you resolve the issue of trust has been established, but yet it's not reciprocated in terms of using it to benefit the people or the community, right? And that's what you call the politics of data. Literally used by politicians to avoid carrying out certain decisions produced or recommended by AI. How does a consultant advise people who don't want to use the optimal decisions generated by AI? So again, it's all about the people factor, right? The human minds resisting AI. How do you deal with that? That's the most complicated thing, according to a lot of our panelists, actually.
Oh, indeed, it is, right? And what I've actually seen, I'll give you a couple of examples of how I've worked around resistance, if you will. It has primarily been a function of communication. Where we're seeing examples of the Internet of Things or AI not being adopted, despite there being trust in, say, the business case, right, is simply a issue of communications. A real life story is when one of the clients that I actually worked with for a building energy optimization project was able to look at one of our data scientists and wonder, right, that if this person with a PhD and focus on data science is in their mid-20s and I've got more than 30 years of experience in fine-tuning building equipment, then how is this person really going to advise me on optimizing this equipment even further? And hence, I think the over-communication at times comes in, where you have to work hand in glove with people that have been in industry working on specific problems for a long time, to explain to them that it doesn't really matter, whether someone with a mathematical model has necessarily worked on a specific piece of equipment, but the math is there to augment you. It's not there to replace you. And like I mentioned before, right, the moment that becomes clear to individuals on the ground across different levels in organizations, it starts to lead to a lot more openness. It's almost as simple as explaining to a cabbie anywhere on the planet that's been, for example, driving a car for 20 years, driving a taxi for 20 years, and knows that they know the city and its roads inside out, but their performance is going to be augmented by the likes of a Google Maps or a Waze, where it advises them of traffic issues that they're currently not aware of, despite being aware of the roads. And that's going to improve their performance overall, which then leads directly to better revenue for them and a lack of frustration. So once that's communicated, right, in an effective way, that augments that trust in the business case, which a lot of times is driven top down. And this becomes a mechanism, the communication becomes a mechanism to get bottoms up the teams that are actually working with that data and those technologies to be aligned with the rest of the organization.
Thanks, excellent answers on that, Anil. Now, when you talk about communication to the people, right, in the organization. So I guess there could be two categories of people who are basically directly impacted. They are the beneficiaries. They are the, beneficiaries and recipients of the technology, right? And they benefit from it, they use it, and they gain something from it. How about those who are merely bystanders or observers or who are not directly included in this digital transformation? How would the communication differ? Because on one hand, a group of people would be directly involved, directly impacted, directly benefiting from it. On the other hand, there'll be people who miss the cracks, right? Miss out through the cracks, and they are just looking and observing, and what World Economic Forum call them the digital refugees, right? Some of them call it the digital divided people and all that. So how do you bridge that in an organization, organizations that you consult for?
So they're really, if you're not a beneficiary or a sponsor, then, what is the role that you're playing with AI, right? So that's a question that has to be answered. Or for that matter, any technology or even any project, right? What I've noticed is that communication of the benefits, right? So first step, actually, even before we can communicate the benefits, the identification of benefits, and hence subsequently the communication of benefits, and even beyond that, the realization of these benefits is a three-step process in getting not only the organization rallied behind a certain project, but indeed the ecosystem. And that is a key point, right? The identification, and hence my previous point about this not being technology for the sake of technology, which then leads to a lot of problems like the ones that you're describing, Nazri, is important to eliminate, right? Start off with the business problem at hand, start off with the KPIs that you're trying to solve towards, identify if, not which, but if technology is really a solution to the problems that you're trying to solve for. And once you've validated through initial proof of concepts and proof of value that technology indeed is a solution to the problems you're trying to solve for, then you move forward with the communication of the business case, you move forward with the selection process, and hence the realization of value. So throughout this, obviously, you've got to bring the different parts of the ecosystem together. And it's important to also know, right, what roles are different people playing in the ecosystem. So who is a sponsor, who is a beneficiary, etc.
Do you think that CTOs of large organizations are adequately equipped with the knowledge of AI, with the knowledge of cognitive computing, expert systems, decisioning, or they still carry on a very traditional role? Similarly, it's like asking the CFO, right? Are they still performing as a financial gatekeeper, stewardship, or are they performing like a strategic business partner? In your dealings with all the C-suite of organizations that you advise for, do you see things changing, or do you see them still stuck in the legacy kind of roles, that the traditional or classical role that they play? I mean, have things changed for the better, or do you think there's still more, there's still room for more improvement, or the pace, is it just right with all this disruption thing going on?
Yep. So I'll give you the short answer first, right? So the answer is absolutely, right? I'm bullish about the change that we're seeing, and we're actually seeing change across a spectrum of industries and as well as public sector. I'll back that answer up with some data, right? So the companies that we're seeing that are deriving the most value from their AI report several strengths that set them apart from other industries, right? And from other companies which are their peers. So the first is better overall performance, right? So obviously the findings suggest that companies that are seeing more EBIT contribution from AI experience better year-over-year growth overall than do other companies, right? So this is a bit obvious. The second is your point, which is they're reporting better overall leadership. So respondents, right, in our survey through MGI said that AI high performers rate their C-suite, right, so the CXOs, including the CTO, as very effective, right, much more than their other respondents do. They're much more, these CXOs are much more likely than others to say that AI initiatives have an engaged, response for what they're trying to solve for. And the teams that they work with are able to vouch for the fact that they have a knowledgeable champion for AI, IoT, and other technologies in the C-suite, right? So this is an important point. The third is the resource commitment to AI, right? So obviously you have to have sponsorship from the top, but we're seeing that AI high performers actually invest more of their digital budgets in AI than their counterparts. and they're likely to increase their AI investments in the next 3 years. We've also seen that these companies have the ability to develop AI solutions in-house as opposed to purchasing solutions. So this actually says where they're actually spending their money in not only experimenting with AI, but in actually building AI capabilities, right? And they typically employ more AI-related talent, such as data engineers, data architects, translators, than their counterparts. And last but not the least, they're also more likely than other companies to have built a standardized end-to-end platform for AI data science and data engineering and application development. So long story short is, yes, I'm bullish. And here are the reasons why, which is where we are seeing traction not only from the top down, but absolutely companies across industries put money where their mouth is.
Excellent. Thanks for your bullish assurance there, Ani. Now, you have seen the C-suite in action. You probably converse with the board level, right? And then you probably dealt with the HODs. If there were a couple of misalignment or discrepancies or friction that happens between these three layers, what would be the top three or top issues that they struggle to align the very high level, the strategic level, and the operational, as well as the tactical level? I mean, what sort of I would say gaps or challenges that they face between these three levels?
Yep. So what I've seen over and over, right, across the last several years, is that the disconnect lies in why we're actually doing something. It really comes down to the understanding that strategy is not just a point of view. It's a point of view that also has an execution path associated with it. So extremely important for your strategic direction to take into consideration not only at a high level what direction you're driving towards, but also equally important is the ability to make this real. And friction, a lot of times, right, between layers in an organization comes from the inability to execute towards a strategy. And a lot of times, this is because the strategy has taken into consideration maybe what is a shiny new toy, right? Like I mentioned earlier, without taking into consideration what the impact is to their business. At the same time, without being grounded in reality in terms of actually what's possible with technology. So it's critically important to engage in a design thinking approach, right? Like we spoke about earlier, where you're not only engaging with different parts of your ecosystem, but you're actually bringing to the table representation from different layers inside your organization when you decide a path forward. And this is really where design thinking shines and really is able to even be the early sponsor, if you will, of new technologies, right? Like IoT, like AI. And with this collaborative approach that design thinking brings to the table, you're able to eliminate this potential of friction by ensuring that your strategy is grounded in reality, by ensuring that different layers in the organization actually feel ownership of the strategy, and most importantly, focusing on outcomes as opposed to technology.
How would you envisage the future of AI in those examples that you mentioned? How far, how deep? You talk about everything we touch in life now can be AI, so to speak, right? That there's going to be AI, there's going to be technology attached to anything we touch. How far can it go in the next 5 years or so? What can we expect into the future? So you covered quite a bit of sectors or industry focus and so on. But what would you consider the most pervasive, the most impactful, and the most meaningful technology that will really impact humanity and so on?
Yeah, so in the future, my take is that AI could help tackle some of society's most pressing challenges. For example, by automating routine or unsafe activities, and also those prone to human error, AI could actually allow humans to be more productive and to work and live more safely. So I'll quote one study, right, that came from the US. So this study estimated that by replacing human drivers with more accurate autonomous vehicles, we could save thousands of lives every year by reducing accidents.
Wow.
And I've actually been driving some of this work at a large metals and mining company. And we've actually been able to illustrate what the impact in a very limited mine setting even is to accidents that happen year over year, right? We've been able to establish a baseline. We've been able to capture the accidents that are just misses, which are accidents that are not reported, right? Because it was an accident that was just missed. And through technology that exists today, reduce those accidents, reduce those just misses. So if you think about that more holistically, right, it comes down to thousands of lives, if not tens of thousands of lives year over year that can be saved. And what can be more meaningful than this, right? So overall, I have a very bullish outlook for AI if used ethically, transparently, and responsibly.
Indeed. And this is a very familiar site for you, right, Ani? It's produced by McKinsey Global Institute, and it shows the potential of ROI. However, I must add to the audience that this is all pre-COVID. This study is done pre-COVID, and you can see there are a few hundred use cases there, 1,400 use cases, 19 industries, 9 business functions, and all that. Would the ROI for the, in terms of potential incremental value from AI, would it have changed post-COVID into 2021? You mentioned about
so
transport and
indeed,
logistics. Yeah.
we are actually seeing a shift, right, because of COVID. What I will say is, without getting into the actual numbers, is the shift that we are seeing is more around acceleration, right?
Okay.
Where companies that were maybe on the fence, right, pre-COVID, are now starting to literally accelerate their plans. And for companies that had robust plans up front, they are starting to accelerate the deployment of using digital technologies for multiple purposes, right? All the way from revenue generation, cost savings, health and safety of employees across the board, right? Upskilling of their employees and their workforce across the board. So there inevitably is a shift, right? The second part of the answer is that we have now identified, simply for an industry like manufacturing, specifically discrete manufacturing, there are over 100 use cases just within that sector, right? That can be, and that are being immediately impacted using technologies like IoT and AI. So, like I said, right, I think the opportunity is to use technology responsibly to drive specific outcomes. And COVID, as I'm seeing it in general, is accelerating the entire paradigm.
Right. In all of the sectors that you see in here in this chart, right? Which ones do you feel that there's going to be most complication, most sophisticated, and most resistance towards AI adoption, and which one is deemed to be the relatively accelerated, quick, and easy to adopt with quick wins? Would there be any specific flavor that you have or you've been through that you are able to share with us?
Yes, so it's not a stack rank, right? I tell you this. It's more a bifurcation. What I've seen personally is that there is a significant difference between industries that have used digital technologies previously to improve their revenues, to manage their costs, to manage their workforce, to improve safety, and companies that have historically not been early adopters, if you will. And this bifurcation is what's actually even driving the difference between accelerating the adoption of digital technologies versus embarking on the adoption of digital technologies. So the good news is that everyone's moving forward with their digital plans more aggressively than they have in the past. The tempered element of that good news is not everyone is at the same level. Obviously, the ones that are new are still learning, but the trajectory is in the right direction.
Excellent. And if we have the last 5 minutes to pick your brain on this particular question, Ani. Now, assuming that you have you've seen many programs, many policies, many projects that are implemented by public agencies all over the world when it comes to digital transformation, AI adoption, AI programs, and so on and so forth. Now, if you were to pick out one program that is so impactful done by any other government in the world, right? What would it be, and why do you consider it to be very impactful and meaningful to you? Which programs that involve AI that's carried out by governments all over the world attract you most? That wow, it's like out of the world. I never thought of it. This is something interesting. We should do it more. What would it be?
There is more than one, right? In fact, there's several that have either deployed AI and other such technologies, or are currently deploying AI or other such technologies, right, to drive significant value upfront. So if you think about smart cities, right, let's take that one because you asked about public sector. There are at least 3 distinct pillars that are meaningfully impacted using AI. So the first is transportation. The second is safety and security. And the third is citizen services, right? And then of course, there's a long tail of different types of use cases in different categories that are meaningful and impactful. But we're seeing a significant amount of traction with these 3. And across the board, right, across the continents of Asia, Europe, and the Americas, I've personally been involved in and have seen significant traction across transportation, all the way from elimination of minor annoyances like parking meters, right? Anyone that you talk to about parking meters will tell you that they're not a huge fan for multiple reasons. So all the way from elimination of parking meters, where you're able to pay for your parking dynamically through an app, and the app is then able to notify you that your time slot is about to expire, and hence top up, please. Basic things like that, through to complicated things within that same pillar of transportation, which is better traffic management, immediately impacts the resident's life in a positive way. So for example, me, instead of spending 2 hours daily in traffic, now I spend only 40 minutes. That's a huge improvement to my lifestyle, right? So we're seeing a revolutionary level of work being done in this pillar, right, across a bunch of different use cases. The second is the pillar of safety and security, right? So we're starting to see dramatic usage of cameras across the board, across a bunch of different use cases to keep people safe, to secure buildings, to secure facilities, at the same time being used ethically, transparently, and responsibly, right? And keeping people's privacy in mind. The third is that of citizen services, right? So all the way from smart grid, bill payments, through to garbage collection, right? And garbage collection is almost a pain point in every city that we've worked with. And there's a lot of different ways of using AI to make those garbage collection points dynamic, to have better route management for the garbage vehicles, hence eliminating a pain point in citizen lives. So these are the 3 pillars that I would say we're seeing traction across the board, across multiple geographies in the public sector. Nazri, do we still have you?
Yes. Sorry, there's a little bit of internet connectivity issue. I lost you a few words only, so not to worry. I still get the most of it. Carry on, please. Yeah.
No, so that was my point, right? So I actually wrapped up my point that saying that we are actually seeing traction across these 3 pillars of transportation, safety and security,
Okay.
and citizen services across geographies
Yes.
where revolutionary level work is being done.
Fantastic. Transportation safety and security, citizen services. We have two quick questions to answer. If you look at the open panel, if you could give a quick and short answer to that, that would be fantastic. Are you able to open up your Q&A box, Ani?
Yes,
I can read out to you. Okay. In the post-COVID era, what are the top Greenfield plans to accelerate building the SME sector? So you're going to put on your SME hat, the SME cluster hat. What sort of plans are there to push SME to become presumably bankable, and they are able to scale and transform themselves? And that's the first question. Yeah.
Indeed. So SMEs, what I've seen is, SMEs are obviously hugely impacted by COVID, and they're actually using technologies like AI to upskill their workforce in a meaningful sort of way. There's a lot of investment going on in terms of optimizing, to take a tangible example, the shop floor in SMEs that are involved in manufacturing. But if you look at the broader spectrum of SMEs, what we're actually seeing is across the board investment in upskilling their workforce and enabling them to deal with the next wave of growth.
Right. So your answer centers around the reskilling, upskilling programs to bring them up to speed, yeah, rather than learning about AI per se.
No, it's both, right? I mean, obviously, you're using AI to upskill your workforce, and you're getting them to
learn
use AI as well. Exactly.
Or use AI. Okay, as a beneficiary, as what we spoke about earlier.
Exactly.
There's a second one, something to do with education sector. Do you see any effects, tangible effects arising from using AI for the education sector, or is it not proven and it's not applicable in education?
So I've got two answers for this question, right? So the first answer is pretty much what we spoke about already, that we're seeing an element of design thinking come into education and providing technical skills to the data scientists and the engineers of tomorrow. I think the question also touches upon whether AI is being used in edutech. And the answer is a resounding yes, right? I mean, we're seeing a significant shift in both developed economies as well as emerging economies, moving towards testing as well as education on personalized devices, right? And this could not have been possible without AI, because the testing and the online classes a lot of times are based on the levels of individual students. So the easy way to do this is to provide, an online video and ask the students to go read up or watch up, if you will. But we're starting to see significant traction in different mechanisms where students are actually taking personalized tests depending on their levels of proficiency, and hence subsequently following up on personalized coaching as well.
I've heard of personalized learning. I've heard of personalized teaching. Now I've heard personalized testing. Indeed. Is this being implemented or applied anywhere in the world? Or?
I think it's been implemented in multiple geographies, again, both in emerging as well as in developed economies.
Personalized testing. So everybody has a personalized score in terms of their knowledge and absorption of knowledge, yeah?
It's an evolution of dynamic testing, right? The likes of which Kaplan actually introduced 20, 30 years back.
Okay, interesting. I think
Indeed.
most public and most private schools would not have adopted that yet, but I'm very curious to see the outcome of that. Because you all study in a personalized way to score for the same exam, right? You study differently to score for the same exam, or you are taught differently because of your different learning habits or learning methods, but you still sit for the same exam. So now you're saying the teaching may be different or personalized, the learning may be personalized now, the testing is even personalized. I look forward to this being applied in a more rampant way. I'll be very curious, because that would democratize education in many ways that you can imagine, yeah? So thank you so much, Ani, for your astounding, very insightful knowledge and nuggets of knowledge.
Thanks for having me.
Do you have any last words to say to the audience?
Just that I might be late for my next meeting.
Thank you so much.
Jokes apart, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me, Nazri.
We owe you coffee for that in Singapore. Since you're in Singapore, we owe you coffee and whatnot. All right.
Perfect.
Thank
Thanks
you so
for
much.
having me. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
Yes,